Most people are not suffering because they are alone. They are suffering because they are too emotionally dependent. Dependent on attention, dependent on approval, dependent on constant reassurance that they matter. But the more your peace depends on others, the more control you give away. Your mood changes when people change. Your confidence weakens when appreciation decreases. Your mind becomes restless when expectations are not fulfilled. Buddhist wisdom teaches a powerful truth. The moment you stop needing people to feel complete, your emotional freedom begins. When you no longer depend on constant validation, your mind becomes calm. When you no longer fear being alone, your heart becomes strong. When you no longer chase reassurance, your peace becomes stable. In this video, you will discover 8 powerful lessons that will help you release emotional dependence, protect your inner peace, and build a mind that remains calm, balanced, and free, regardless of who stays and who leaves. 1. Needing people creates emotional instability. When happiness depends on people, emotions begin to move like waves in the ocean. One moment, the mind feels calm, and the next moment, it feels disturbed. This instability does not come from life itself, but from the silent habit of expecting others to constantly fulfill emotional needs. When someone gives attention, the heart feels comfort. When someone appreciates our presence, the mind feels valuable. But when the same attention is not given, when the same appreciation is not shown, the emotional state begins to shake. This creates a cycle where peace is no longer in our control. Instead of feeling stable, the mind becomes dependent on the reactions of others. Many people do not realize how deeply this pattern affects their emotional health. They slowly begin to check their happiness through people's behavior. If someone responds warmly, the day feels good. If someone becomes distant, the mind begins to overthink. Small changes in people's tone, attitude, or availability start affecting inner peace. This creates emotional pressure that slowly weakens confidence. Instead of feeling strong within, a person begins to feel uncertain because their peace is no longer self-created. It becomes controlled by external situations. Buddhist wisdom teaches that anything which constantly changes cannot provide permanent stability. People's emotions change, their priorities change, their circumstances change. Even their ability to give time and attention changes. Expecting constant emotional support from something that is naturally unstable creates silent suffering. The mind begins to resist reality. It begins to question why people behave differently. It begins to feel hurt by changes that are actually part of life. Emotional dependence often begins in a very subtle way. At first, it feels natural to expect care and understanding from others. Human connection is important, and healthy relationships add beauty to life. But the problem begins when connection turns into dependence. When a person begins to feel incomplete without constant reassurance, emotional balance becomes difficult. They may feel uncomfortable when alone. They may feel restless when communication decreases. They may feel anxious when they do not receive the attention they expect. This inner discomfort slowly increases mental noise. A peaceful mind is not created by controlling people. A peaceful mind is created by understanding the nature of life. Everything outside us has movement and change. People cannot always behave according to our emotional expectations. They cannot always give the same energy every day. They cannot always understand what we feel without communication. When we expect emotional perfection from imperfect situations, disappointment becomes natural. Buddhist teachings encourage developing awareness of this emotional pattern. Awareness helps us observe how often our mood changes based on people's responses. It helps us understand how much power we unknowingly give to others over our emotional state. When a person realizes that their peace is constantly reacting to external behavior, they begin to see the importance of emotional independence. Emotional strength develops when the mind learns to remain balanced, even when situations change. This does not mean becoming distant or cold. It means becoming stable. It means allowing people to be themselves without making them responsible for our inner peace. When happiness is built on self-understanding, emotional reactions become calmer. A person no longer feels deeply disturbed by small changes in behavior. They no longer feel lost when someone becomes unavailable. Instead of feeling empty, they remain centered. One of the greatest forms of freedom is emotional stability. It allows a person to experience connection without fear. It allows relationships to exist without pressure. It allows appreciation without attachment. When peace is self-created, relationships become lighter and more meaningful. There is less expectation and more acceptance. There is less fear and more trust in life. When stability comes from within, the mind stops constantly searching for reassurance. It stops depending on constant validation. It stops measuring self-worth through others' behavior. This creates a calm confidence that does not need frequent confirmation. Emotional independence allows a person to interact with the world from a place of balance rather than need. When you begin to understand that your peace does not have to depend on anyone's attention, a quiet strength begins to grow. You start appreciating people without fearing their absence. You start valuing connection without losing stability. You start feeling complete without constant reassurance. This is the beginning of emotional freedom. When peace comes from understanding rather than approval, life becomes less stressful, more balanced, and deeply peaceful. 2. Expectations create unnecessary suffering. Expectation is one of the most silent causes of emotional pain. It often begins with a simple hope that people will understand us, support us, and behave in ways that make us feel valued. At first, this seems natural, because human beings naturally seek connection and understanding. But the problem begins when expectations slowly become emotional demands, when the mind begins to create a fixed image of how people should behave. Any difference from that image starts creating discomfort. This discomfort grows into disappointment, and disappointment slowly turns into suffering. Many people do not notice how often expectations influence their mood. They expect others to respond quickly. They expect people to remember small details. They expect the same level of effort that they themselves give. They expect emotional sensitivity, attention, and appreciation in the same way they express it. But every person has a different personality, different priorities, and different emotional capacity. Not everyone expresses care in the same way. Not everyone understands situations in the same way. When expectations become rigid, relationships begin to feel heavy. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering often begins when reality does not match the image created by the mind. The mind creates stories about how situations should unfold. It imagines how people should react. It imagines how relationships should progress. But life does not always follow these mental images. Life moves according to many changing conditions. People have their own worries, responsibilities, and limitations. Sometimes they cannot give the same attention. Sometimes they cannot respond with the same emotional energy. When the mind resists these natural changes, emotional tension increases. Expectations also create invisible pressure in relationships. When we expect constant reassurance, we unknowingly place emotional responsibility on others. This responsibility may feel heavy to them, even if they do not express it openly. Relationships begin to feel like obligations instead of natural connections. The beauty of connection slowly disappears when too much expectation is involved. Instead of enjoying the presence of people, the mind begins measuring their behavior. It begins analyzing whether they are meeting emotional expectations. This constant evaluation creates restlessness. Another difficulty with expectations is that they often remain unspoken. Many people expect others to understand their feelings without communication. They expect people to notice their emotional needs without expressing them clearly. They expect others to sense their sadness, their stress, or their desire for support. When this unspoken expectation is not fulfilled, the heart feels ignored. But the reality is that every mind experiences life differently. People cannot always understand what is not expressed. When expectations are silent, misunderstandings become common. Expectations also create comparison. A person begins to compare how much effort they give and how much effort they receive. They begin to count emotional investments. They begin to feel that relationships are unbalanced. This comparison increases dissatisfaction. Instead of appreciating what exists, the mind focuses on what is missing. This habit slowly reduces gratitude and increases frustration. The mind becomes more sensitive to small disappointments. Buddhist teachings encourage observing the nature of expectation with awareness. Expectations are often created by attachment. When we become attached to certain outcomes, we begin to fear anything that threatens those outcomes. We fear losing attention. We fear losing importance. We fear losing connection. This fear creates emotional tension even before anything negative happens. The mind begins imagining possible disappointments. This imagination itself becomes a source of suffering. Reducing expectations does not mean becoming careless or distant. It means becoming emotionally balanced. It means allowing people to be human. It means accepting that everyone has limitations. When expectations become flexible, relationships feel lighter. There is less pressure and more understanding. Instead of demanding perfect emotional responses, the mind becomes open to natural imperfections. Acceptance brings emotional relief. When we accept that people cannot always behave according to our emotional preferences, frustration decreases. The mind stops resisting reality. It begins adapting instead of reacting. This adaptation creates stability. It allows us to appreciate what people can give instead of focusing on what they cannot give. Another important realization is that expectations often come from the desire to feel important. The mind seeks reassurance that it matters. It seeks confirmation that it is valued. But when self-worth depends on others' behavior, emotional peace becomes fragile. True emotional strength develops when self-worth is understood internally. When a person understands their value, they do not constantly seek confirmation. They appreciate appreciation, but they do not depend on it. Letting go of excessive expectation creates space for peace. The mind becomes less reactive. It becomes less sensitive to small changes in behavior. It becomes less disturbed by delays, misunderstandings, or differences in emotional expression. Instead of feeling disappointed repeatedly, a person begins to feel calm more often. Relationships also become healthier when expectations are balanced. When there is less pressure, communication becomes more natural. People feel more comfortable expressing themselves honestly. There is less fear of disappointing each other. There is more space for genuine connection. Appreciation grows naturally when expectations are not overwhelming. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace increases when acceptance increases. Acceptance does not mean tolerating harmful behavior. It means understanding that life is imperfect. It means recognizing that emotional comfort cannot always come from outside sources. It means developing the ability to remain stable even when situations do not meet mental expectations. When expectations decrease, gratitude increases. A person begins to appreciate small gestures. They begin to value presence without demanding perfection. They begin to enjoy connection without fear of disappointment. This shift creates emotional freedom. The mind becomes lighter because it is no longer carrying the weight of constant expectation. Unnecessary suffering often comes from expecting life to behave according to personal desires. But life becomes more peaceful when we allow it to unfold naturally. When we stop demanding emotional certainty from uncertain situations, we begin to feel calm. When we release the need for perfect responses from imperfect people, relationships become easier. Reducing expectations does not reduce love. It purifies love. It removes pressure from connection. It removes fear from relationships. It removes the constant worry that something may not happen as imagined. When the mind learns to appreciate without expecting too much, emotional stability increases. Peace becomes more consistent. Happiness becomes less dependent on external reactions. Life becomes simpler, calmer, and more balanced. When expectations become lighter, the heart becomes lighter. And when the heart becomes lighter, suffering begins to fade. 3. Emotional freedom begins with self-completeness. Emotional freedom begins the moment a person realizes that completeness is not something that comes from outside, but something that develops within. Many people move through life believing that someone else will complete them. Someone else will fill the empty spaces in their heart, and someone else will bring lasting peace into their mind. This belief silently creates emotional dependence because the mind begins to search for stability in people rather than developing stability within itself. When completeness is expected from outside sources, inner peace becomes uncertain because people, situations, and circumstances are always changing. Self-completeness means feeling internally balanced, even when external conditions are not perfect. It means understanding that while relationships can add beauty to life, they are not the foundation of emotional stability. A self-complete person enjoys connection, but does not fear solitude. They value companionship, but do not lose themselves when alone. Their happiness is not built entirely on external reassurance, because their mind has learned to create peace from understanding rather than attachment. Many people feel uncomfortable when they are alone, not because solitude is painful, but because they have not yet developed a peaceful relationship with their own thoughts. When the mind is constantly used to distraction, silence can feel unfamiliar. When attention is always directed outward, stillness can feel uncomfortable. But Buddhist wisdom teaches that silence is not emptiness. It is space for understanding. When a person begins to spend time with themselves without distraction, they slowly begin to understand their emotions, their patterns of thinking, and their sources of anxiety. This awareness becomes the foundation of emotional stability. Self-completeness develops when a person stops measuring their worth through other people's behavior. When self-worth depends on attention, appreciation, or constant validation, emotional balance becomes fragile. A person may feel confident when appreciated, but doubtful when ignored. They may feel strong when supported, but uncertain when alone. This constant movement creates inner instability. But when a person understands their value internally, they no longer need continuous reassurance. Their confidence becomes quiet and steady. A self-complete person does not reject relationships. Instead, they approach relationships with emotional balance. They are able to give care without feeling empty. They are able to appreciate others without feeling dependent. They are able to express kindness without expecting constant return. This creates healthier connections because the relationship is no longer based on emotional neediness. It becomes based on mutual understanding and respect. One of the deepest transformations happens when a person begins to enjoy their own presence. Instead of seeing solitude as loneliness, they begin to see it as peace. Instead of feeling incomplete when alone, they begin to feel free. They use this time to reflect, to grow, and to strengthen their mindset. They begin to observe their thoughts without being controlled by them. This ability to observe the mind creates emotional clarity. Buddhist teachings explain that attachment often comes from the fear of emptiness. The mind believes that without constant connection, life will feel meaningless. But when a person develops self-understanding, they realize that peace is not dependent on constant interaction. They discover that calmness can exist even in silence. They discover that happiness can exist even without constant stimulation. This realization removes unnecessary fear of being alone. Self-completeness also protects a person from unhealthy attachment. When a person feels incomplete, they may accept situations that disturb their peace simply to avoid loneliness. They may tolerate behavior that reduces their self-respect because they fear losing connection. They may remain in environments that create stress because they feel uncertain about being alone. But when a person feels complete within, they make decisions from clarity rather than fear. They choose peace over emotional pressure. Emotional independence allows a person to interact with others freely. They are not constantly worried about losing approval. They are not constantly trying to maintain an image. They are not constantly adjusting themselves to satisfy everyone. Their behavior becomes natural because it is not driven by the need for validation. This authenticity creates deeper and more meaningful relationships. Self-completeness also strengthens resilience. When difficulties appear in relationships, a self-complete person does not immediately feel emotionally broken. They understand that life includes change. They understand that people sometimes misunderstand each other. They understand that emotional discomfort is temporary. This understanding prevents unnecessary overthinking. Instead of reacting with fear, they respond with awareness. Another important aspect of self-completeness is emotional responsibility. A self-complete person does not expect others to constantly repair their mood. They do not expect others to constantly remove their stress. They understand that emotional balance is a personal practice. They take responsibility for calming their own mind. This responsibility strengthens inner confidence because they no longer feel helpless in challenging situations. When the mind stops searching outside for constant reassurance, it begins to discover inner clarity. Thoughts become less chaotic. Emotions become easier to understand. Reactions become more balanced. A quiet confidence begins to grow. This confidence does not need to be announced because it is felt internally. It creates stability even when circumstances are uncertain. Self-completeness does not mean isolation. It means connection without dependency. It means caring without losing stability. It means appreciating people while understanding that peace must come from within. When a person becomes emotionally complete, they do not feel empty when alone, and they do not feel overwhelmed when surrounded by others. Their mind remains balanced in different situations. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that true freedom is not found in controlling external conditions, but in understanding the internal world. When the mind becomes familiar with itself, it becomes less restless. When a person understands their emotional patterns, they become less reactive. When awareness increases, unnecessary suffering decreases. Self-completeness is a gradual process. It develops through patience, self-reflection, and gentle understanding. It develops when a person spends time improving their thoughts instead of constantly seeking distraction. It develops when a person learns to calm their mind instead of constantly seeking stimulation. It develops when a person begins to feel comfortable in their own presence. As self-completeness grows, emotional dependence naturally decreases. A person no longer feels controlled by attention or affected by temporary changes in behavior. Their peace becomes stable because it is built on awareness. Their confidence becomes steady because it is built on understanding. Emotional freedom begins when a person realizes that they were never incomplete. The feeling of incompleteness was created by the belief that something outside was missing. But when the mind becomes calm, it realizes that peace was always available within. When a person becomes complete within themselves, relationships become more peaceful, decisions become clearer, and life becomes more balanced. Self-completeness is not separation from the world. It is stability within the world. And this stability is the foundation of emotional freedom. 4. Stop seeking constant validation. One of the most common reasons people feel emotionally tired is the habit of constantly seeking validation. Validation means looking outside ourselves for confirmation that we are good enough, worthy enough, important enough, or successful enough. It is the desire to feel accepted through other people's approval. At first, this desire seems natural because every human being appreciates appreciation. Every person feels encouraged when they are valued. But the problem begins when validation becomes a constant need instead of a simple preference. When the mind becomes dependent on approval, emotional stability becomes fragile. A person begins to measure their worth based on how others respond to them. If people appreciate their work, they feel confident. If people praise their personality, they feel strong. But when appreciation is missing, doubt begins to grow. They begin to question themselves. They begin to wonder whether they are good enough. This creates an emotional pattern where self-worth is constantly rising and falling according to external reactions. Buddhist wisdom teaches that true confidence is not built through external praise, but through internal clarity. When a person understands their values, their intentions, and their direction in life, they do not need constant reminders from others to feel stable. Their mind becomes steady because it is not constantly searching for reassurance. They appreciate appreciation, but they are not dependent on it. Seeking constant validation often creates invisible pressure. A person begins to adjust their behavior in order to be accepted. They may change their opinions to avoid disagreement. They may hide their true feelings to avoid rejection. They may try to satisfy everyone in order to maintain approval. This continuous adjustment slowly weakens authenticity. Instead of living according to understanding, they begin living according to expectation. Instead of expressing truth, they begin expressing what they think others want to hear. This habit creates inner conflict. The mind begins to feel divided between what it truly feels and what it thinks it should express. Over time, this conflict creates emotional exhaustion. A person may appear calm externally, but internally they feel unsettled. They feel the pressure of constantly maintaining an image that will be accepted by others. Validation seeking also increases sensitivity to criticism. When a person's self-worth depends on approval, criticism feels more painful than necessary. Even small disagreements begin to feel personal. Even simple feedback begins to feel like rejection. This sensitivity creates anxiety because the mind begins to fear disapproval. The fear of disapproval limits growth because a person becomes hesitant to express ideas or make decisions independently. Buddhist teachings remind us that approval and disapproval are natural parts of life. It is not possible to receive acceptance from everyone. People have different perspectives, different preferences, and different expectations. Trying to satisfy every opinion creates confusion. When a person tries to please everyone, they slowly lose connection with their own understanding. Instead of developing clarity, they become more uncertain about their direction. Constant validation seeking also creates emotional dependence on recognition. A person begins to feel motivated only when appreciation is present. When recognition is missing, motivation decreases. This creates inconsistency in effort. True strength develops when motivation comes from inner purpose rather than external reward. When actions are guided by values rather than approval, consistency becomes easier. Another challenge with validation seeking is that it creates comparison. A person begins to observe how much appreciation others receive. They begin comparing attention, recognition, and approval. This comparison creates dissatisfaction because the mind begins to feel that others are receiving more validation. Instead of focusing on growth, attention becomes focused on external reactions. Comparison reduces contentment and increases insecurity. Buddhist wisdom encourages observing this pattern with awareness. When a person notices how often they seek reassurance, they begin to understand how much emotional power they are giving to others. They begin to notice how often their mood changes according to people's opinions. This awareness creates the possibility of change. When the mind becomes aware of its own habits, it becomes easier to gradually reduce dependence. Stopping the need for constant validation does not mean ignoring feedback. Feedback can be useful for improvement. Appreciation can be encouraging. But emotional balance requires understanding that self-worth cannot depend entirely on external response. When self-worth becomes internally stable, appreciation becomes a bonus rather than a necessity. Inner clarity develops when a person begins to ask themselves important questions. Are my actions aligned with my values? Are my intentions honest? Am I improving gradually? These questions help build confidence that does not depend on public approval. When a person respects their own efforts, they do not constantly need recognition to feel worthy. Another important shift happens when a person accepts that misunderstanding is part of life. Not everyone will understand intentions. Not everyone will see effort. Not everyone will appreciate growth. Expecting universal approval creates emotional disturbance. Accepting that opinions differ creates emotional stability. When a person stops trying to control how everyone perceives them, they begin to feel lighter. Buddhist teachings often highlight the importance of self-awareness. Self-awareness allows a person to observe their thoughts without becoming controlled by them. When the mind notices the desire for validation, it can gently question whether this approval is truly necessary. Often, the mind realizes that the need for validation is not essential for peace. Peace comes from understanding, not from constant praise. Reducing validation seeking also improves relationships. When a person is not constantly seeking approval, their interactions become more natural. They express themselves honestly, they listen more carefully, they connect more genuinely. There is less pressure to impress and more space to understand each other. Relationships become calmer when they are not burdened by the need for constant reassurance. Emotional freedom increases when self-worth becomes internally stable. A person no longer feels deeply disturbed by disagreement. They no longer feel weak when approval is delayed. They no longer feel anxious when recognition is absent. Their confidence becomes quiet but strong. This quiet confidence allows them to make decisions with clarity. When a person stops seeking constant validation, they begin to develop independence of thought. They are able to reflect before reacting. They are able to evaluate situations based on understanding rather than popularity. They become less influenced by temporary opinions. This independence strengthens emotional maturity. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that external approval is temporary, but inner clarity can be lasting. When clarity becomes strong, approval becomes less necessary. When understanding becomes deep, reassurance becomes less important. When awareness becomes stable, the mind becomes peaceful. True confidence grows when a person respects themselves even when approval is absent. True strength develops when a person continues improving even when recognition is limited. True peace appears when a person no longer feels the need to constantly prove their worth. When validation is no longer a constant need, emotional pressure reduces. The mind becomes calmer. Actions become more authentic. Life becomes simpler. There is less fear of judgment and more focus on growth. When you stop seeking constant validation, you begin to experience emotional freedom. Because your worth no longer depends on changing opinions. It becomes rooted in understanding, and understanding creates lasting peace. 5. Learn to enjoy your own company. One of the most powerful signs of emotional maturity is the ability to feel comfortable in your own presence. Many people fear being alone, not because solitude is truly painful, but because they are not used to facing their own thoughts without distraction. The modern world constantly encourages noise, activity, and external stimulation. People fill their time with conversations, entertainment, and endless information, so they do not have to sit quietly with themselves. Over time, this habit creates a subtle discomfort with silence. When the external noise stops, the mind feels restless. When the distractions disappear, emotions that were previously hidden begin to surface. Buddhist wisdom teaches that solitude is not emptiness. It is an opportunity to understand the mind. When a person learns to enjoy their own company, they begin to build a peaceful relationship with themselves. Instead of feeling incomplete when alone, they begin to feel calm. Instead of searching for constant interaction, they begin to appreciate stillness. This shift changes emotional dependence into emotional independence. Many people remain surrounded by others, but still feel internally unsettled. This is because peace does not come from the number of people present, but from the quality of connection with oneself. When a person does not feel comfortable within their own thoughts, external company becomes a temporary distraction rather than a source of true calmness. The moment the distraction disappears, the feeling of emptiness returns. But when a person develops comfort within, solitude becomes peaceful rather than uncomfortable. Learning to enjoy your own company begins with understanding that being alone does not mean being lonely. Loneliness is a state of mind that feels disconnected, unsupported, or emotionally empty. Solitude, however, is a state of awareness where a person feels connected with their own inner world. In solitude, the mind has space to observe thoughts without pressure. It has space to reflect on experiences without distraction. It has space to grow without influence. When a person becomes comfortable alone, they begin to notice their emotional patterns more clearly. They begin to understand what disturbs their peace. They begin to recognize what strengthens their calmness. This awareness helps them make wiser decisions. Instead of reacting quickly, they begin responding thoughtfully. Instead of being influenced by temporary emotions, they begin observing emotions without becoming controlled by them. Enjoying your own company also strengthens independence of thought. When a person constantly seeks company, their opinions often become influenced by surrounding voices. Their decisions may become shaped by the expectations of others. But when a person spends time alone, they begin to hear their own thoughts more clearly. They begin to develop personal understanding. They begin to trust their own judgment. This clarity strengthens confidence. Solitude also creates space for emotional healing. Many emotions remain unprocessed because the mind is constantly occupied. Feelings of disappointment, confusion, or uncertainty often remain hidden under daily distractions. But when a person allows themselves quiet moments, these emotions begin to surface gently. Instead of avoiding them, the person can observe them calmly. This observation allows emotional tension to reduce gradually. Buddhist teachings often emphasize awareness of the present moment. Solitude creates a natural environment for this awareness. When distractions reduce, the mind becomes more sensitive to small experiences. A person begins to appreciate simple things, such as quiet breathing, peaceful surroundings, or calm thoughts. This sensitivity increases gratitude. Gratitude increases contentment. Contentment increases peace. Another important benefit of enjoying your own company is the ability to make decisions without fear of loneliness. Many people remain in situations that disturb their peace simply because they fear being alone. They tolerate environments that create stress because they believe loneliness will feel worse. But when a person becomes comfortable with themselves, this fear reduces. They begin choosing environments that support growth rather than environments that only provide distraction. When solitude becomes peaceful, relationships also improve. A person who enjoys their own company does not demand constant attention. They do not create pressure through emotional dependence. They do not expect others to constantly remove their discomfort. Instead, they interact from a place of calmness. Their conversations become more meaningful because they are not driven by fear of silence. Their connections become healthier because they are not controlled by emotional neediness. Learning to enjoy your own company also increases creativity. When the mind is not constantly occupied by external input, it begins to explore new ideas. It begins to reflect on experiences more deeply. It begins to notice patterns and possibilities. Many forms of insight develop in moments of quiet reflection. A calm mind becomes more observant, more thoughtful, and more balanced. At first, solitude may feel unfamiliar. A person who is used to constant activity may feel restless when external stimulation reduces. Thoughts may appear more active. The mind may try to search for distraction, but gradually, with patience, this restlessness begins to reduce. The mind begins to adjust to stillness. It begins to recognize that silence is not uncomfortable. It is peaceful. Enjoying your own company also builds emotional resilience. When a person feels stable alone, unexpected changes become easier to manage. They do not feel lost when plans change. They do not feel anxious when communication reduces. They do not feel uncertain when situations become quiet. Their stability does not depend on constant external interaction. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace is always available in the present moment. But the mind often misses this peace because it is constantly searching for stimulation. Solitude allows the mind to slow down. It allows awareness to deepen. It allows emotional noise to settle. Another transformation happens when a person begins to appreciate their own presence. Instead of constantly trying to escape silence, they begin welcoming it. Instead of feeling uncomfortable in stillness, they begin feeling relaxed. They begin understanding that peace does not require constant activity. Peace often appears when activity slows down. Enjoying your own company also reduces the fear of missing out. Many people feel pressure to always be engaged in social activity. They feel that being alone means they are losing opportunities. But when a person values their own time, they understand that not every moment needs to be filled with external interaction. Some of the most valuable moments occur in quiet reflection. When the mind becomes comfortable with itself, it stops seeking constant distraction. It stops fearing silence. It stops feeling empty in stillness. Instead, it begins to feel stable. This stability allows a person to enjoy relationships without depending on them. It allows them to appreciate connection without losing independence. Solitude becomes a space where emotional balance grows naturally. The mind becomes less reactive. Thoughts become more organized. Feelings become easier to understand. This clarity creates confidence that does not require constant reassurance. Learning to enjoy your own company does not separate you from the world. It prepares you to interact with the world more peacefully. It allows you to bring calmness into relationships rather than bringing emotional neediness. It allows you to appreciate people without fearing their absence. When a person becomes comfortable with themselves, they no longer feel pressured to fill every moment with noise. They no longer feel anxious about being alone. They no longer feel incomplete without constant interaction. They begin to feel whole. They begin to feel peaceful. They begin to feel emotionally free. Because the greatest relationship a person can build is the relationship with their own mind. When this relationship becomes peaceful, life becomes peaceful. And when life becomes peaceful, emotional freedom begins to feel natural. 6. Detachment protects your peace. Detachment is often misunderstood. Many people think detachment means becoming distant, cold, or emotionally disconnected from the world. They believe detachment means not caring about people, not valuing relationships, and not expressing love. But Buddhist wisdom explains detachment in a very different way. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. Detachment means you stop losing yourself. It means you stop allowing external situations to control your emotional stability. It means you learn to remain calm even when circumstances are uncertain. Peace becomes fragile when it depends too much on people's behavior. When emotional balance depends on constant reassurance, even small changes in communication can create discomfort. When happiness depends on predictable responses, unexpected behavior can create anxiety. The mind begins to feel disturbed, not because the situation is severe, but because attachment has created fear. Fear of losing connection, fear of losing importance, fear of losing emotional security. Attachment often creates the illusion that peace exists outside of us. The mind begins to believe that certain people must behave in certain ways in order for us to feel calm. It begins to believe that stability depends on maintaining certain connections. This belief quietly creates pressure. The pressure to keep people satisfied, the pressure to avoid disagreement, the pressure to prevent change. But life naturally changes. People's priorities shift, situations evolve, emotions fluctuate. When the mind resists these changes, suffering appears. Detachment protects peace because it allows the mind to accept change without feeling threatened. It creates space between emotional stability and external circumstances. Instead of reacting immediately to every shift in behavior, the mind learns to observe calmly. This observation creates clarity. Instead of assuming negative meaning in every change, the mind learns patience. Instead of becoming overwhelmed by uncertainty, the mind becomes balanced. Buddhist teachings often describe attachment as a root of unnecessary suffering. This does not mean relationships are unimportant. Relationships bring support, companionship, and understanding, but attachment becomes harmful when emotional security becomes entirely dependent on those relationships. When the mind begins to believe that happiness cannot exist without certain people, fear quietly increases. Fear creates tension. Tension disturbs peace. Detachment reduces this tension. It allows a person to appreciate relationships without feeling controlled by them. It allows care without emotional pressure. It allows connection without fear of loss. A detached mind does not avoid relationships. It interacts with them more peacefully. It values people, but does not depend on them for stability. It respects connection, but does not sacrifice inner calmness to maintain approval. One important aspect of detachment is understanding that everything in life has a changing nature. Situations change, people change, and even personal preferences change over time. When the mind expects permanence in an impermanent world, disappointment becomes frequent. But when the mind accepts change as natural, emotional resistance reduces. Acceptance does not remove care, it removes unnecessary struggle. Detachment also strengthens emotional clarity. When attachment is strong, judgment becomes clouded by fear. A person may ignore unhealthy situations because they fear losing connection. They may tolerate behavior that disturbs their peace because they fear being alone. They may remain in environments that create stress because they feel uncertain about change. But detachment allows decisions to be guided by understanding rather than fear. It allows a person to choose peace without feeling guilty. Another benefit of detachment is emotional balance during disagreement. Differences in opinion are part of life. Every person has unique experiences that shape their perspective. When attachment is excessive, disagreement feels threatening. The mind may interpret disagreement as rejection. This interpretation creates emotional disturbance. But when detachment is present, disagreement is seen as difference rather than danger. The mind remains calm even when opinions differ. Detachment also protects energy. Emotional energy becomes exhausted when the mind constantly tries to control situations that cannot be controlled. Trying to manage how everyone behaves creates mental fatigue. Trying to maintain approval from everyone creates emotional pressure. Detachment allows the mind to focus on what can be controlled, which is personal response. This shift reduces unnecessary stress. Many people feel tired not because life is difficult, but because they carry emotional burdens that do not belong to them. They carry the responsibility of keeping everyone satisfied. They carry the worry of maintaining constant connection. They carry the fear of losing approval. Detachment gently removes these burdens. It reminds the mind that not everything requires emotional reaction. Some situations simply require understanding. Buddhist wisdom encourages observing thoughts with awareness. When attachment creates fear, awareness helps identify the source of discomfort. The mind begins to notice how often peace becomes dependent on certain outcomes. It begins to notice how often emotional stability is connected to external behavior. This awareness creates freedom. When the mind sees the pattern clearly, it becomes easier to gradually reduce dependence. Detachment also improves communication. When a person is not controlled by emotional fear, they express themselves more calmly, they listen more patiently, they respond more thoughtfully. Instead of reacting with anxiety, they respond with understanding. This calm communication creates healthier relationships. It allows space for honesty without fear. Another transformation happens when detachment strengthens self-respect. A person who values their peace does not easily accept environments that constantly disturb their mind. They do not feel pressured to remain in situations that reduce emotional stability. They do not feel obligated to sacrifice calmness in order to maintain connection. This self-respect protects mental well-being. Detachment also reduces overthinking. When attachment is strong, the mind constantly analyzes situations. It searches for hidden meaning in small actions. It worries about possible changes. It imagines negative outcomes. This mental activity creates restlessness, but when detachment develops, the mind becomes less reactive. It allows situations to unfold without excessive interpretation. This creates mental quietness. It is important to understand that detachment does not remove kindness. It does not remove compassion. It does not remove connection. Instead, it purifies connection. It removes fear from relationships. It removes pressure from interaction. It allows appreciation to exist without emotional tension. A detached mind understands that people have their own journeys. Their behavior reflects their own experiences, their own emotions, and their own priorities. When the mind stops trying to control these factors, peace increases. Instead of resisting change, the mind adapts. Instead of fearing uncertainty, the mind accepts possibility. Detachment also strengthens patience. When expectations reduce, frustration reduces. When frustration reduces, reactions become calmer. A person becomes more tolerant of small inconveniences. They become less disturbed by temporary discomfort. This patience improves emotional stability. Buddhist teachings often emphasize balance. Balance allows a person to care without becoming overwhelmed. Balance allows involvement without losing calmness. Balance allows connection without losing independence. Detachment creates this balance. It prevents emotional extremes. It protects the mind from becoming too dependent on any single situation. When detachment grows, confidence also grows. A person becomes less afraid of change. They become less worried about losing approval. They become less anxious about uncertain outcomes. This confidence creates freedom. Freedom allows the mind to focus on growth instead of fear. Detachment also increases appreciation. When a person does not feel emotionally dependent, they appreciate people more genuinely. They value connection without expecting perfection. They accept differences without feeling threatened. This acceptance creates peaceful interaction. Peace becomes stable when it is not controlled by external factors. Detachment protects this stability. It allows a person to remain calm even when situations shift. It allows emotional balance even when outcomes are uncertain. It allows happiness even when circumstances are imperfect. Learning detachment is a gradual process. It develops through awareness, patience, and understanding. It does not require sudden change. It requires gentle observation of emotional patterns. It requires recognizing how often attachment creates fear. It requires slowly shifting peace from outside sources to inner understanding. When the mind becomes less attached to outcomes, it becomes more open to life. It becomes less resistant to change. It becomes less fearful of uncertainty. This openness creates emotional flexibility. Emotional flexibility creates resilience. Detachment protects peace because it removes unnecessary emotional struggle. It allows the mind to accept what cannot be controlled. It allows the heart to remain calm even when situations change. It allows relationships to exist without pressure. A detached mind is not empty. It is peaceful. It is not distant. It is balanced. It is not cold. It is calm. When detachment develops, emotional freedom becomes possible, because peace no longer depends on controlling everything outside. Peace begins to grow from understanding everything within. 7. Your peace should not depend on people's behavior. One of the greatest causes of emotional disturbance is allowing other people's behavior to control your inner peace. Many people unknowingly connect their emotional stability to how others treat them, how others respond to them, and how others behave around them. When someone speaks kindly, the mind feels calm. When someone behaves differently, the mind becomes restless. This creates a situation where peace is no longer stable because it constantly depends on changing circumstances. People's behavior is influenced by many factors that are often invisible to us. Their mood may be affected by their responsibilities. Their reactions may be shaped by their past experiences. Their decisions may be influenced by pressures that we cannot see. When we expect people to behave according to our emotional needs at all times, we unknowingly create a fragile foundation for peace. Because people are human, and human behavior naturally changes. Sometimes people are kind and supportive. Sometimes they are distracted. Sometimes they are dealing with difficulties that they do not express openly. Sometimes they are simply unaware of the impact of their actions. When peace becomes dependent on consistent external behavior, emotional balance becomes uncertain. Even small changes can create large emotional reactions. Buddhist wisdom teaches that stability develops when the mind stops depending entirely on external conditions. External conditions are always changing. Situations shift, relationships evolve, and circumstances develop in unexpected ways. If emotional peace is built only on favorable conditions, it will disappear when those conditions change. But when peace is developed internally, it becomes less affected by external fluctuations. One common habit that disturbs peace is over-interpreting people's actions. The mind often tries to find meaning in every small detail. A delayed response may be interpreted as disinterest. A short reply may be interpreted as rejection. A difference in tone may be interpreted as disrespect. These interpretations are often created by the mind's insecurity rather than reality. The mind begins creating stories without complete understanding. These stories create emotional discomfort. When the mind becomes aware of this pattern, It becomes easier to create distance between events and emotional reactions. Instead of immediately assuming negative meaning, a person can observe calmly. They can allow time for clarity. They can avoid reacting based on incomplete understanding. This patience protects peace. Another reason people's behavior affects emotional stability is the desire to feel important. The mind seeks confirmation that it matters. When someone shows attention, the mind feels reassured. When attention decreases, insecurity may appear. This insecurity creates sensitivity to small changes. A person may begin to feel ignored, even when there is no intention of ignoring. They may begin to feel undervalued, even when there is no intention of reducing value. Buddhist teachings remind us that self-worth should not depend entirely on how others behave. People's behavior often reflects their own state of mind rather than our value. When someone is distracted, it does not necessarily mean they do not care. When someone behaves differently, it does not always mean something is wrong. Understanding this reduces unnecessary emotional reaction. Emotional freedom increases when the mind stops demanding consistent reassurance. It becomes easier to accept that people cannot always respond perfectly. It becomes easier to understand that communication may vary according to circumstances. This understanding creates flexibility. Flexibility reduces frustration. Another important realization is that trying to control people's behavior often creates stress. A person may try to adjust everything in order to maintain emotional comfort. They may try to avoid situations that could create disagreement. They may try to keep everyone satisfied to maintain harmony, but controlling every situation is not possible. The more control is attempted, the more tension increases. Peace becomes more stable when attention shifts from controlling others to understanding oneself. Instead of trying to manage how people behave, a person begins managing how they respond. This shift creates emotional independence. A person may not be able to control how others act, but they can control how they interpret and respond to those actions. Buddhist wisdom emphasizes the importance of observing reactions without immediately acting on them. When someone behaves in an unexpected way, the mind may feel discomfort. Instead of reacting instantly, awareness allows the emotion to be observed calmly. This pause creates space for understanding. Often, the emotional reaction becomes smaller when observed without judgment. People's behavior also changes because their circumstances change. Responsibilities increase, priorities shift, and situations develop. Expecting constant consistency in a constantly changing world creates frustration. Acceptance of change creates peace. Acceptance does not mean tolerating harmful behavior. It means understanding that variation is natural. When peace depends on people's approval, criticism feels threatening. When peace depends on people's attention, absence feels painful. When peace depends on people's agreement, difference feels uncomfortable. But when peace develops internally, these external variations have less impact. A person becomes less reactive and more balanced. Another benefit of internal peace is reduced emotional exhaustion. Constantly monitoring people's behavior requires mental energy. Analyzing every interaction creates tension. Trying to predict reactions creates anxiety. When a person stops connecting peace to external behavior, mental pressure decreases. The mind becomes calmer because it is no longer constantly evaluating every situation. Buddhist teachings encourage developing equanimity, which means maintaining balance even when situations change. Equanimity does not remove emotions, it stabilizes emotions. It allows a person to experience situations without becoming overwhelmed. It allows reactions to become thoughtful rather than impulsive. When peace is internally developed, a person becomes less dependent on reassurance. They no longer feel deeply affected by delayed responses. They no longer feel disturbed by small misunderstandings. They no longer feel uncertain when communication changes temporarily. Instead, they remain stable because their emotional foundation is strong. Peace also improves relationships. When a person is not constantly reacting to small changes, communication becomes more relaxed. There is less pressure to behave perfectly. There is more space for natural interaction. This creates more authentic connection. Relationships become more comfortable when they are not burdened by constant emotional sensitivity. It is also important to recognize that people cannot always understand our emotional needs unless they are clearly expressed. Sometimes disappointment occurs not because someone intended harm, but because expectations were unspoken. Clear communication often prevents unnecessary misunderstanding. But even with communication, complete consistency cannot always be expected. Human behavior includes variation. When the mind accepts this variation, emotional stability increases. Instead of expecting perfection, the mind begins appreciating effort. Instead of focusing on small changes, the mind focuses on overall understanding. This shift reduces emotional tension. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment to specific outcomes often creates disappointment. When we expect others to behave in a particular way, any difference creates discomfort. But when expectations become flexible, emotional reactions become softer. A person becomes more understanding and less reactive. Your peace becomes stronger when it is not easily disturbed. It becomes stronger when it does not depend on constant agreement. It becomes stronger when it does not require constant reassurance. This strength creates confidence. Confidence allows a person to remain calm even in uncertain situations. Emotional independence does not remove connection, it strengthens connection. When a person is internally peaceful, they bring calmness into relationships. They do not create pressure through constant emotional neediness. They do not demand continuous reassurance. They interact with patience and understanding. Another transformation happens when a person stops personalizing every situation. Not everything is about us. Sometimes people are simply busy. Sometimes they are focused on responsibilities. Sometimes they are dealing with their own difficulties. When the mind stops interpreting every action as personal, emotional disturbance reduces. Peace grows when interpretation becomes balanced. Instead of assuming negative meaning, the mind becomes open to different possibilities. This openness reduces anxiety. It allows the mind to remain calm even without complete information. Buddhist teachings encourage observing life with awareness rather than reacting with fear. Fear often exaggerates small situations. Awareness allows situations to be seen clearly. Clarity reduces unnecessary suffering. Your peace should not depend on perfect behavior from imperfect people. People are learning, changing, and growing just as we are. When we allow this process, relationships become more natural. We become less demanding and more understanding. When peace becomes internal, emotional reactions become more balanced. Disappointment may still occur, but it does not control the mind. Disagreement may still happen, but it does not disturb stability. Change may still appear, but it does not create fear. Peace becomes stable when it is built on understanding rather than expectation. When your calmness does not depend on others' behavior, you begin to feel free. Free from constant worry. Free from emotional pressure. Free from unnecessary fear. Your peace becomes your own responsibility. And when peace becomes your responsibility, it becomes more stable, because what is built within cannot be easily shaken by what happens outside. When your peace no longer depends on how people behave, emotional freedom becomes possible, and emotional freedom creates lasting calmness. 8. Emotional independence creates lasting happiness. Lasting happiness does not come from controlling situations, controlling people, or constantly trying to secure emotional reassurance. Lasting happiness develops when a person becomes emotionally independent. Emotional independence means the ability to maintain inner balance without constantly depending on external approval, attention, or validation. It is the understanding that while relationships, achievements, and experiences can bring joy, true stability must come from within. Many people spend a large part of their lives searching for happiness in external circumstances. They believe happiness will arrive when they receive enough appreciation, enough love, enough support, or enough recognition. They believe happiness will become stable when everything around them becomes predictable. But life rarely remains predictable. Situations change, people change, and conditions evolve. When happiness depends entirely on things that constantly change, emotional peace becomes uncertain. Emotional independence creates a different experience of life. Instead of constantly seeking reassurance, a person begins to create reassurance from understanding. Instead of constantly needing approval, a person begins to feel confident through self-awareness. Instead of feeling empty when alone, a person begins to feel calm in their own presence. This calmness creates stability that is not easily disturbed by external circumstances. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment to external conditions often creates suffering because external conditions cannot always be controlled. People cannot always behave as expected. Situations cannot always develop as planned. When the mind expects constant certainty, uncertainty creates discomfort. Emotional independence removes the need for constant certainty. It allows the mind to remain peaceful even when outcomes are unclear. Emotional independence does not mean isolation. It does not mean avoiding relationships. It does not mean refusing support. Instead, it means developing inner strength so that relationships become a source of appreciation rather than a source of emotional dependence. When emotional independence grows, connections become healthier. A person interacts from a place of calmness rather than fear of loss. One of the strongest benefits of emotional independence is freedom from constant worry about others' opinions. Many people feel anxious because they continuously think about how they are perceived. They wonder whether they are appreciated enough, valued enough, or respected enough. This constant concern creates mental pressure. Emotional independence allows a person to respect others' opinions without being controlled by them. They remain open to feedback, but they do not lose stability when opinions differ. Another benefit of emotional independence is the ability to remain calm during change. Change is a natural part of life. Relationships change, responsibilities change, and personal priorities change. A person who depends heavily on fixed situations often feels disturbed when change appears. But a person who develops emotional independence adapts more easily. Their peace is not based on permanence. It is based on understanding that change is part of life. Emotional independence also strengthens resilience. Resilience means the ability to recover from difficulty without losing emotional balance. When emotional stability depends on external reassurance, challenges feel heavier. But when stability is developed internally, difficulties become easier to manage. The mind learns to remain calm even when situations are uncomfortable. This calmness allows clearer thinking and wiser decisions. Another important aspect of emotional independence is self-responsibility. A person begins to understand that emotional balance cannot always come from others. They stop expecting others to constantly remove their discomfort. Instead, they learn to calm their own mind. They learn to understand their own emotions. They learn to guide their own thoughts toward clarity. This self-responsibility strengthens confidence. Buddhist teachings often emphasize awareness of thoughts. Thoughts influence emotions, and emotions influence reactions. When a person becomes aware of their thoughts, they gain the ability to gently guide their mental direction. Instead of allowing negative thinking to grow unchecked, they observe thoughts calmly. This observation reduces emotional intensity. Emotional independence grows when thoughts become less reactive. Emotional independence also reduces fear of loneliness. Many people remain emotionally dependent because they fear being alone. They believe that solitude will create emptiness. But when a person develops comfort within themselves, solitude becomes peaceful rather than frightening. They begin to enjoy time for reflection, growth, and understanding. They begin to see solitude as an opportunity rather than a problem. When fear of loneliness decreases, decision-making becomes clearer. A person becomes less likely to remain in situations that disturb their peace simply to avoid being alone. They choose environments that support growth. They choose relationships that feel respectful. They value quality of connection rather than quantity of connection. Emotional independence also improves communication. When a person is not constantly seeking reassurance, their words become more calm and balanced. They listen more patiently. They express themselves more clearly. They do not speak from fear of rejection. They speak from clarity of understanding. This clarity improves relationships because communication becomes more genuine. Another transformation occurs when a person stops measuring happiness only through external events. Instead of believing happiness depends on major achievements or constant excitement, they begin appreciating small moments of peace. A calm morning, a quiet evening, a balanced thought, or a moment of clarity becomes meaningful. Gratitude increases when attention shifts from constant stimulation to simple awareness. Buddhist wisdom explains that the mind often becomes restless when it continuously seeks something outside. It constantly searches for new experiences, new approval, and new reassurance. But when the mind becomes satisfied within, this restless search decreases. Contentment begins to grow. Contentment does not remove ambition, it removes unnecessary dissatisfaction. Emotional independence allows a person to enjoy relationships without feeling controlled by them. They appreciate kindness but do not feel broken by absence. They value connection but do not feel incomplete without constant interaction. This balance creates emotional freedom. Another benefit of emotional independence is the ability to remain stable during disagreement. Differences in perspective are natural. People have unique experiences that shape their understanding. Emotional dependence often creates fear of disagreement, because disagreement feels like rejection. But emotional independence allows a person to respect differences without feeling threatened. They remain calm, even when opinions differ. Emotional independence also supports long-term happiness because it reduces emotional extremes. When the mind constantly depends on external reactions, happiness becomes intense but temporary, and disappointment becomes deep and frequent. But when emotional stability develops internally, happiness becomes steady. It may not always feel intense, but it feels consistent. Consistency creates lasting peace. Buddhist teachings encourage developing balance between involvement and detachment. Involvement allows connection, while detachment protects stability. Emotional independence combines both qualities. A person participates in life while maintaining inner calmness. They care without losing clarity. They appreciate without becoming dependent. Another important realization is that emotional independence increases self-respect. When a person understands that their peace is valuable, they begin protecting their mental environment. They become mindful of what influences their thoughts. They become selective about what they allow to disturb their calmness. This selectiveness is not isolation, it is wisdom. Emotional independence also allows a person to move forward more confidently. When self-worth is internally stable, fear of judgment decreases. fear of rejection decreases, fear of misunderstanding decreases. These reductions create freedom to grow. Growth becomes easier when fear becomes smaller. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace is not found by controlling every situation, but by understanding the nature of the mind. When the mind becomes aware of its own patterns, emotional reactions become more balanced. When reactions become balanced, peace becomes more consistent. Emotional independence develops gradually. It develops through patience and awareness. It develops when a person begins to observe how often they seek reassurance. It develops when a person begins to understand that external approval cannot always provide lasting stability. It develops when a person begins building inner confidence step by step. As emotional independence grows, happiness becomes less dependent on constant attention. The mind begins to feel peaceful even without continuous stimulation. It begins to feel stable even when situations are uncertain. It begins to feel confident even without constant praise. This stability creates lasting happiness because it does not disappear when circumstances change. It remains present during both quiet and active moments. It remains present during both agreement and disagreement. It remains present during both connection and solitude. Emotional independence allows a person to appreciate life more deeply. Instead of constantly searching for reassurance, they begin noticing calmness that already exists. Instead of constantly seeking validation, they begin trusting their understanding. Instead of constantly fearing change, they begin adapting with patience. When emotional independence becomes strong, relationships become more meaningful. They are no longer used to fill emptiness. They are appreciated as shared experiences. This appreciation creates healthier connection. Lasting happiness is not created by perfect situations. It is created by a peaceful mind. A peaceful mind does not depend on constant reassurance. A peaceful mind does not fear temporary change. A peaceful mind understands that stability begins within. Emotional independence creates the freedom to experience life without constant fear of loss. It allows connection without pressure. It allows love without insecurity. It allows growth without anxiety. When the mind becomes emotionally independent, happiness becomes natural rather than forced. Because the source of peace is no longer outside, it is quietly present within. And when peace is present within, happiness becomes lasting. Emotional freedom begins the moment you stop asking the world to constantly reassure your worth. Not everyone will stay forever. Not everyone will always understand you. Not everyone will always give the attention you once received. And that is not a loss. That is life teaching you where your true stability must come from. When you stop needing people to feel complete, you stop living in fear of losing them. When you stop depending on constant approval, your confidence becomes quiet and unshakable. When you stop searching for happiness outside, you begin discovering a deeper peace within. Relationships become more meaningful when they are based on choice, not emotional need. Love becomes more peaceful when it is free from fear. Life becomes more balanced when your mind is not controlled by changing circumstances. True emotional independence does not remove connection from your life. It removes pressure from your heart. It allows you to appreciate people without losing yourself. It allows you to care without becoming emotionally unstable. It allows you to live with calmness even when situations change. Remember, peace is not found when everyone behaves the way you expect. Peace is found when your mind no longer depends on anyone's behavior to remain stable. Protect your peace, strengthen your mind, and understand this deeply. The strongest person is not the one surrounded by many people. The strongest person is the one who feels complete within themselves. Because when your happiness no longer depends on others, your freedom truly begins.